Oprah Winfrey sat there in complete silence. Not during the interview. Not during the emotional moments. Not during the tears. This happened years later, after the headlines cooled down, after the Netflix deals, after the speeches and magazine covers and carefully filmed backyard clips. The silence came afterward. And for someone like Oprah, silence means something. Because this is a woman who built an empire reading people. That is literally her reputation. For decades, audiences trusted that when Oprah looked across a room and nodded slowly at someone's story, she believed it. Millions of people followed her instincts before they followed facts. That is why the 2021 interview with Meghan Markle and Prince Harry felt so powerful at the time. People believed it instantly, not only because of what was said, but because Oprah was the one listening. And now, years later, people have started noticing something strange. Oprah rarely mentions Meghan anymore. No public praise, no visible friendship, no glowing interviews, no casual support, just distance, and many are questioning why. Today, we are diving into what really happened behind one of the most talked about royal interviews in modern history. Not just the interview itself, but the atmosphere around it. The shifting alliances, the quiet Hollywood retreat, the whispers that started long before cameras rolled. Because according to journalists who covered the royal family at the time, some concerns were already floating around years earlier. Back in May 2018, the wedding between Meghan Markle and Prince Harry looked like a global fairy tale. Millions watched from around the world as carriages rolled through Windsor and celebrities filled the pews inside St. George's Chapel. But accounts from insiders reveal something unusual happened that day. People inside the wedding reportedly kept asking one another a very simple question. How do you know the couple? And apparently the answers became awkward, because the guest list did not feel personal. It felt strategic. That was the first thing people noticed. You had George Clooney, Amal Clooney, Idris Elba, and, of course, Oprah Winfrey. Huge names. But according to multiple reports from that period, many of these relationships were not especially deep before the wedding itself. That immediately stood out inside royal circles because royal weddings traditionally work differently. When Catherine Middleton married Prince William, guests included people from school, family friends, longtime connections, people who existed before palace life. That history matters in royal culture. But Meghan's wedding felt different, almost like two worlds colliding. One royal, one Hollywood. And what many people don't know is that several palace observers quietly questioned whether this was less about tradition and more about positioning for the future. Because think about it carefully. If someone wanted influence beyond royal life someday, who would they want sitting beside them at their wedding? Exactly the people who could protect a public image globally. That is where Oprah becomes important. Because Oprah was not just another celebrity guest. Her presence gave credibility. It signaled approval. If Oprah believed in you, millions of others usually followed. At the time, she appeared fully supportive. She spoke warmly about the ceremony, about the atmosphere, about Windsor itself. But, according to society insiders, there were already whispers behind palace walls that things were not running smoothly. Staff tensions, last-minute demands, arguments over details. And one story kept resurfacing repeatedly: the chapel dispute. Accounts from journalists and insiders reveal Meghan reportedly wanted certain adjustments made inside St. George's Chapel to change the atmosphere and presentation of the ceremony. Palace officials reportedly shut those ideas down immediately. Now, on the surface, that sounds minor, but in royal tradition, it was not minor at all. You are talking about a chapel connected to centuries of monarchy, a place tied directly to royal history. There are rules, expectations, boundaries, and according to people familiar with the atmosphere at the time, this became symbolic of a larger concern. The feeling that Meghan was approaching royal life differently from everyone before her, not as a tradition, as a project. Then came the tiara disagreement. That story exploded quietly behind the scenes. Because when Queen Elizabeth II said no to a request, that was usually the end of the conversation. Palace hierarchy was extremely clear, but reports suggested there was pushback, and according to royal commentators, Prince Harry stepped in forcefully. The phrase people kept repeating afterward, "What Meghan wants, Meghan gets." That line spread everywhere, and inside palace circles it reportedly changed perceptions fast, because suddenly this no longer looked like a smooth royal transition. It looked like tension building underneath the public image. But there's more to this story. At that stage, Oprah still publicly supported Meghan completely. There was no visible conflict, no distancing, no warning signs publicly. Yet looking back now, many people believe Oprah may have noticed the disconnect early. The difference between the image being presented and the atmosphere behind it. And that matters because Oprah's entire career depends on reading authenticity correctly. That is her currency, her instincts, her judgment, her credibility, which is exactly why the next chapter became so dangerous. Because by 2021, Oprah was no longer sitting quietly at a wedding. She was sitting across from Meghan Markle on international television while the entire world listened carefully to every word. Let's talk about what really happened before that Oprah interview ever aired. Because by the time the cameras rolled in 2021, this story had already been building quietly for years. The public only saw the glamorous version, the smiling photos, the dramatic headlines, the emotional speeches. But according to journalists who covered the royal family closely, palace staff and Hollywood insiders had already started noticing patterns much earlier. And strangely enough, many of those patterns began during the honeymoon phase. Back in 2018, people genuinely wanted this marriage to work. That part is important. There was real excitement around Meghan Markle joining the royal family. She was American, mixed race, divorced, a former actress. She represented something modern entering one of the oldest institutions on earth. That created massive global interest, especially in Hollywood. Suddenly, Meghan was not just an actress from a legal drama anymore. She was becoming part of the British monarchy. And for celebrities, media executives, and influential figures, proximity to that kind of story mattered. A lot. That is why the wedding became such a spectacle. But what many people don't know is how unusual the atmosphere reportedly felt behind closed doors. Royal insiders remember conversations happening almost immediately after the ceremony. Not about romance, about optics. Because unlike Catherine Middleton, who slowly adapted into royal life over years, Meghan entered the institution at full speed. Faster press coverage, bigger international attention, louder reactions. And according to accounts from palace journalists, that pace created tension early. There were stories about staff feeling overwhelmed, stories about difficult scheduling, moments, stories about communication breakdowns behind the scenes. Now look, every royal transition has pressure. Nobody is pretending palace life is easy. But insiders say the concern here was not just stress, it was approach. There was reportedly a growing feeling that Meghan viewed royal life differently from the people around her, more media-focused, more image-aware, more Hollywood. And that difference started becoming visible in small ways. The chapel issue was one example. The tiara disagreement was another. But there were smaller moments too. Moments that sounded tiny individually, yet together created a bigger picture. Staff reportedly described situations where normal royal procedures suddenly became tense discussions. That matters because the royal family runs heavily on protocol. People may laugh at it from the outside, but inside that world, rules are everything. Especially around hierarchy, especially around tradition. And when those expectations clash with someone coming from Hollywood culture, friction happens fast. This was only the beginning. One detail that keeps resurfacing in royal commentary is how Prince Harry changed during this period. Before Meghan, Harry already had a complicated relationship with royal life. That part was never hidden. He struggled with press attention for years and openly disliked parts of palace culture. But according to some royal correspondents, his Behavior became more defensive after the engagement, more confrontational, more protective, and palace staff reportedly noticed it. The phrase, "what Meghan wants, Meghan gets," became symbolic because it captured the mood people felt was developing behind the scenes. Whether every version of that story is accurate or not, the perception itself became powerful. Perception matters in royal life, sometimes more than facts. And according to society insiders, this perception started spreading through both palace circles and media circles at the same time. Meanwhile, Oprah watched all of this from a very unique position. She was not palace staff. She was not royal family. She was something else entirely. She was Hollywood power. And that matters because Oprah understands branding better than almost anyone alive. She knows how public images are built. She knows how celebrity alliances work. She knows how carefully narratives are shaped behind the scenes.